Before Julia, before Gilda, and even before Lucy, there was Mabel. Mabel Normand was the archetype comedienne of the silent screen. A pioneer film actress that could stand toe-to-toe with Charlie Chaplin and Roscoe Arbuckle. She could take the hits and give them right back. This was years before the suffragette movement, at a time when women were still tightly connected with 19th century etiquette and expectations. Mabel was ahead of her time in many ways, transfixed with automobiles and airplanes, often centering her films around daredevil stunts where she gleefully jumped into the action herself. But that wasn't all. She was also prolific behind the lens, directing many of her own films, uncredited, adapting what she learned from working with the likes of D.W. Griffith and her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Max Sennett. During her unfortunately short career, she made hundreds of short films and quite a few features as well. Mabel died in 1930 at age 37 from complications from tuberculosis. In more recent decades, her life was woven into a hit Broadway musical called Mac and Mabel, and even had a song written about her by Stevie Nicks. Just like many of her contemporaries, many of Mabel's films became lost after the sound revolution reinvented Hollywood. Lost in studio fires, nitrate decomposition, or simply being thrown out, Mabel's Adventures was thought to be one of those casualties. Until today. Discovered under the floorboards of a house, this nitrate 35mm reel, along with some other newsreel materials, were donated to the Niles Essanay Museum to be preserved. Mabel's Adventures, released on December 16, 1912, clocks in at just under 9 minutes. It briskly tells the tale of Mabel, who in an attempt to evade two aggressive suitors, disguises herself as Cousin Jack. The plan backfires as the two men take a liking to their new friend and take Cousin Jack out drinking, ultimately winding up at a burlesque show where things take an interesting spin. Cross-dressing was a common trope during the early days of cinema comedy, just as it had been on the stage. It's interesting to note that in her very next release, Mabel's Stratagem, she also dresses as a boy to disguise herself after losing her job, wearing almost the same outfit you'll see in Mabel's Adventures. Eagle-eye fans will recognize some of the familiar locations, including shots filmed outside Keystone's Bronco Studio building at 1712 Alessandro. The home next to the studio, in fact, is the same spot where Chaplin shot his very earliest scenes in his debut film, Making a Living, just over a year later. The film also includes appearances by reliable Senate alumni, including Ford Sterling, Fred Mace, Henry Learman, and Frank Operman. You'll notice after the main feature, there's another title called Useful Sheep that was included on the reel as well. This is what was known as a split reel, usually a short documentary subject to pad out the rest of the reel if the main feature ran a little short. In the effort to preserve this 35mm reel as originally discovered, Useful Sheep was also restored and remains attached to the end of Mabel's Adventures, exactly how audiences would have experienced it in December 1912. Thanks to this discovery by the Niles Essanay Film Museum, this adds to not only Mabel's legacy, but a reminder that even a century later, these newly discovered artifacts from the past can still have an influence and inspire us in the future. I can only imagine what Mabel and company would think, knowing these films are still generating laughter from fans all over the world more than a decade after they were created. Now sit back and enjoy the world re-premiere of Mabel's Adventures, and, to a lesser extent, Useful Sheep.